Story 1. My college years were some of the best times of my life. Do not get me wrong. I am grateful for the life I have now, but the memories I made during those 4 years have stuck with me forever. If you are still in college, here is my advice. Do not take it for granted. Those years go by faster than you think. I went to a college right by the beach. Our campus was literally on the water. This story takes place during my pledge semester for a fraternity. If you do not know, pledging is basically a semester-long initiation process for everyone who received a bid to join that semester. Most of what happens during pledge is not exactly something you talk about openly, but this particular event stands out. It was the last week of pledging before we officially became fraternity brothers. That week is traditionally when things get intense. For us, it was a known fact that at some point during the final week, we would have to face what everyone called the beach challenge. Here is how it worked. The brothers would pile our whole pledge class into a few cars and drive us about 12 miles down the coast on a Friday night. Once we got there, they would give us 1 hour to finish a massive keg filled with who knows what. After that, they would walk us down to the beach, tie our wrists together, blindfold us, take our phones, watches, and shoes, and then leave us there. Our mission: get back to the house by sunrise. If we failed, we were out. To be honest, I was pretty nervous about it, but there was not much I could do. None of us could. That night was oddly chilly, but I was so excited about finally being done with pledging that it kept my spirits up. The keg was the easy part. By then, we had all mastered dividing up the drinks and pulling the trigger if someone could not hold it down. There were 15 of us in the pledge class. After tying us together, the brothers blindfolded everyone except for the guy at the very front of the line. His name was Tyler, and he was supposed to guide us as our eyes for the night. That was the only help we would get. Our pledge master was a big guy named Miguel, but everyone had to call him Gus, like the character from Breaking Bad. He was an odd dude. He gave us the rules one last time, wished us luck, and then he and the other brothers left us there. I will not list everyone's names, but my closest friends in the group were Tyler, Jake, Aaron, and Raj. I was at the very back of the line with Jake right in front of me. Tyler started leading us, and we began the trek. Without our phones or watches, we had no idea how far we had gone or how much time was left. At first, we tried to keep the mood light by cracking jokes, but that only lasted so long. After what felt like 2 hours, the line fell into silence, except for the occasional pause when someone needed to throw up. I started to zone out. Even the sound of the waves faded as I became trapped in my own thoughts. Everything was silent until I felt a sharp tug on the rope around my wrists. I took a few big steps forward and stopped, thinking Jake must have tripped. He was not exactly the most graceful guy, so it was not surprising. I stood still, waiting. A full minute passed, and something felt off. Just as I was about to call out, the rope tugged tight again, and we started moving. Relieved that Jake had not passed out, I kept walking and slipped back into my daze, my body aching and my mind begging for the night to end. After what felt like endless steps, something changed. My foot hit something unexpected: water. Not damp sand, but a thin layer of ocean water. I took a few more steps, and the water rose to my ankles. Confused, I wondered why Tyler was leading us into the water. The rope pulled tight again, signaling that everyone else was still moving forward, so I followed. I figured someone up front must have needed to rinse their feet or something. If nobody else was complaining about the water, I sure was not going to start. The waves swayed around us, and the water stayed at ankle height for a while. Then, I felt it creeping higher, eventually reaching my shins. It was clear that Tyler was messing with us, and I could not figure out why. Was this challenge not hard enough already? The water was just going to slow us down. Out of nowhere, I picked up on a sound in the distance. A faint droning. I strained my ears and realized it was the sound of a boat engine idling. As we continued to move, the noise grew louder, meaning either the boat was getting closer, or we were heading toward it. My uneasiness grew. The water was now nearly up to my knees. I finally broke what felt like hours of silence. "Guys, what the hell are we doing in the water?" I asked, but no one responded. Confused, I tried again, louder this time. "Guys!" Still nothing. A wave of panic started to rise in my chest. The blindfold suddenly felt suffocating, and I needed to see what was going on. I lifted my wrists toward my face to loosen the knot around my eyes, but the rope jerked my hands back down. Frustrated, I leaned my head toward my hands, quickly undoing the blindfold before the rope could pull me back again. What I saw made my heart drop. Jake was not in front of me. Instead, I was staring at a middle-aged man I had never seen before. He was holding the frayed end of the rope still tied to my wrists. For a second, I was frozen. Then, I noticed what he had used to cut the rope, a rusty kitchen knife clutched in his other hand. My eyes darted past him to a small boat bobbing in the water. 3 more figures were standing aboard, their silhouettes looming. I screamed at the top of my lungs before the man could react. Fueled by pure adrenaline, I yanked my arms upward as hard as I could and kicked him square in the chest. The force was enough to break his grip on the rope, though he managed to grab a handful of my shirt as he stumbled back. The fabric tore with a loud rip as he fell into the water, clutching a piece of my pledge t-shirt. I did not wait to see what happened next. I turned and bolted for the shore, my wrists still bound and my legs splashing through the rising water. A few seconds later, I heard another splash. Someone had jumped off the boat. I did not dare look back. I was almost to the sand when something flew past my head, so close it felt like it grazed the air beside my ear. It was the knife. I watched it spin past me and disappear into the waves. The shock was overwhelming, but the adrenaline kept me going. Once I reached dry land, I finally glanced back. 2 men were in the water and 2 were still on the boat. None of them were chasing me anymore. They were just staring at me, their expressions blank. The closest man still clutched the torn piece of my shirt. I did not stop to wonder why. I ran straight to the street, where the sun had already risen. My fraternity was the last thing on my mind. I flagged down the first car I saw, begged to use their phone, and called the police. By the time the cops arrived, the men and their tiny boat were long gone. I lied about what happened, too scared of the consequences for my fraternity to tell the truth. Luckily, the officers did not press me for details. Back at the house, my fraternity brothers were more annoyed with Tyler than with me. They could not believe he had not noticed anything. He swore up and down that he had heard nothing, and maybe he really had not. I eventually became a brother and things went back to normal, well, mostly. A few weeks later, while playing beach die with a couple of the guys behind the house, Jackson spotted something sticking out of the sand. It was a stick, and tied to it was a strip of white fabric. When I got closer, I recognized it immediately. It was the torn piece of my shirt. The design on the cloth left no doubt it was mine. That piece of my shirt still haunts me. To this day, I have no idea how they knew which fraternity I was in. Some of my brothers think they might have recognized the shirt's design and put 2 and 2 together. But I have a much darker theory. I cannot shake the feeling that those men knew about our tradition ahead of time. It is possible they were aware that our fraternity would be sending pledges out to that beach, blindfolded and defenseless. The more I think about it, the more it seems like they planned the whole thing, waiting for the perfect opportunity to snatch someone. I was just unlucky enough to be at the back of the line. That thought alone still gives me chills. I often wonder what might have happened to me if I had been dragged onto that boat. The possibilities are terrifying to imagine. As for the police, they were no help at all. Despite my report and everything that happened, nothing ever came of it. It has been several years now, and they never found a single clue. Story 2. This all happened about a year ago, which is why I feel like it is finally time to talk about it. My name is Mike, and back then I was a 19-year-old college freshman at a big university in the South. Fraternity life is huge here, almost like a religion. At the time, I was in the middle of pledging for a frat, trying to become one of the brothers. For privacy reasons, I will leave out specific details about the fraternity and the campus. This story is about the night of our initiation, the big moment when me and the other pledges, there were 20 of us, were set to become full-fledged members. Now, the pledging process had been a couple of months long and full of the usual hazing stuff. Blindfolds, weird errands, late-night drives to random places, you get the idea. That night was no different. It was around 10:30 p.m. when they told us to put on blindfolds at the frat house. They took our phones and loaded us into a few separate cars, making sure to split us up. On the drive, they cranked up some corny song and made us sing along at full volume. That was pretty typical for them, making us do random annoying stuff while blindfolded. After about 20 minutes of driving, the car stopped. I heard car doors opening and closing, and soon someone grabbed my arm and guided me out. We walked for what felt like 200 feet before I was told to sit down and stay quiet. I could tell I was sitting on grass, so I figured we were in some kind of field. I could also hear others being guided and seated near me, along with the brothers reminding everyone to stay silent. After about a minute, one of the brothers started talking. I could not see him, but his voice carried authority. He went on about the fraternity, the values, and how we had earned the right to join. Then, for the next half hour or so, we just sat there in silence. Occasionally, I would hear footsteps or the sound of someone being led away. My guess was that they were doing some kind of final ritual with each person one-on-one. Eventually, the footsteps stopped completely, and all I could hear were crickets and the rustling of leaves in the night breeze. It felt like I had been sitting there forever, and I was starting to get nervous. Then, out of nowhere, I heard footsteps again. A hand grabbed my wrist and pulled me up. Whoever it was did not say anything, and I kept quiet too. I just wanted this whole thing to be over so I could take off the blindfold. As we walked, I could feel the ground change from soft grass to rougher dirt. Branches and shrubs brushed against me, so I figured we were walking through some kind of forest. After what felt like forever, the blindfold started to dig into my face, making it hard to see or breathe comfortably. I asked the guy if we could stop so I could adjust it. He let go of me, and as I fumbled with the blindfold, I heard a deep, raspy voice say, "Take it off." Something about his voice gave me chills. It was not anyone I recognized. Still, I hesitated only for a second before pulling off the blindfold. What I saw made my stomach drop. Standing right in front of me was a tall man dressed in all black, wearing one of those creepy vendetta masks. I let out a sharp yell and stumbled back. For a split second, I thought maybe this was some over-the-top hazing stunt, but before I could even finish the thought, he lunged at me, shouting that he was going to take me with him. We hit the ground hard, and he was on top of me, trying to choke me out. I fought back with everything I had, finally managing to shove him off me. Without looking back, I took off running as fast as I could. The moonlight was the only thing guiding me through the woods, and my heart was pounding like crazy. Every few seconds, I glanced behind me, terrified that he was chasing me. Eventually, I heard voices calling my name, and I nearly ran straight into one of the fraternity brothers. Gasping for air, I tried to explain what had just happened. I told him, in broken, panicked words, that some random guy in a mask had led me into the forest and tried to attack me. The next few moments were a blur. 5 or 6 of the brothers grabbed flashlights and bolted past me, yelling that they were going after the guy. One of them stayed behind to calm me down and walk me back to safety. My legs felt like jelly, but I managed to follow him as he guided me out of the woods. When we finally stepped out of the trees, I realized we were in someone's backyard, probably one of the brothers' houses. Nearly the entire fraternity was gathered on the porch, staring at us with wide eyes. My head was still spinning, but I managed to ask, "What the hell is going on?" One of the brothers explained, looking pale and nervous. Apparently, since it was dark and I was at the very back of the line, the guy who was supposed to escort me completely forgot I was there. Somehow, he just missed me. It was only when they noticed movement in the woods and realized I was not in the group that they put 2 and 2 together. I was too shaken to even be mad. None of them had any idea who that man in the mask was. A few speculated it could have been a prank by someone from a rival fraternity. But that did not explain the rest of what happened. Just as I was trying to process everything, the guys with flashlights came running back out of the woods, looking terrified. They shouted at everyone to leave immediately and get back to campus. No one asked questions, we just moved. The brothers locked up the house, and one of them got on the phone with the police. The car ride back was chaotic. Everyone was talking over each other, bombarding me with questions. I did my best to answer, but my mind was racing. Who was that man? Why was he wearing that mask? Where had he been planning to take me? My imagination went wild, spinning up scenarios. Maybe it was some rival frat trying to kidnap me before initiation. But then, why did the brothers react so seriously, locking the house and calling the cops? I got my answer the next day. One of the brothers who had chased after the man pulled me aside and told me what they found in the woods. His face was pale, and his voice shook as he spoke. As they ran through the forest, they saw a light in the distance. They slowed down and crept closer, trying to figure out what it was. When they got near, they realized it was a bonfire in the middle of a clearing. Standing around the fire were several figures dressed entirely in black, wearing those same white vendetta masks. They were chanting and throwing things into the flames. One of the brothers accidentally stepped on a branch, and the loud crack shattered the eerie silence. All the masked figures turned toward them at once. He said it was like something straight out of a horror movie. For a moment, they just stood there, frozen in fear. Then, the masked figures started running straight at them. The brothers panicked and bolted back toward the house, hearts pounding. They barely made it back before warning everyone else to leave and calling the police. Hearing that sent chills down my spine. Somehow, we had stumbled into the middle of what looked like some kind of cult ritual. I tried to put it out of my mind in the days that followed, but I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that masked man lunging at me. Then, a few days later, something happened that made it impossible to move on. The brothers were playing football in the backyard of that same house when they found something hanging from a tree. It was a white vendetta mask. They called the police again, and the cops took the mask as evidence. I do not know if they ever caught those people or if the police figured out what was going on in those woods. But to this day, I still have no idea who those masked figures were or what they were doing. Story 3. I have been thinking a lot about this wild experience lately, and honestly, I am just glad it left me with nothing more than a crazy story to tell. It has been 8 years since I graduated from college. Back then, I went to Cooper Union, a small technical school right in the middle of Manhattan. Living and studying in New York City was incredible, and I would not trade those days for anything. Since we did not have many fraternities at the time, I joined one of the few just to make sure I had a way to attend parties and meet people. I was a pretty normal guy, so getting a bid was not much of a challenge. Most of the pledge events were pretty mild, but I soon learned what they were making up for. Now, I hope I do not get in trouble for sharing this story, but enough time has passed that I figure it is safe to talk about. I doubt my old fraternity is still making their pledges do this kind of thing anymore, at least I hope they are not. The big event during our initiation was something they called a subway crawl. There was an old, abandoned subway station that a lot of teenagers liked to explore. As part of our initiation, the frat made us head down there. We had to enter the tunnel from an active subway platform, walk over to the abandoned station, take some pictures, and then make our way to the next active platform. They gave us subway schedules to make sure there was no chance a train would show up while we were out on the tracks. The plan was to get to the abandoned platform, wait for one train to pass, and then move on before the next one arrived. I know it sounds dangerous, but we were not running from any trains. The route was carefully planned, and we had plenty of time to make it. As long as we avoided the third rail, we would be fine. I was into urban exploration before college, so I found the whole thing more exciting than scary. They picked a random weekday at around 3 in the morning to do this. It was the perfect time since trains were not running as often. There were about 10 of us pledges, which made sense since it was a small school. I should mention my closest friend in the pledge class, a guy named Alex. Alex was one of those people who could make you laugh no matter what. My friends and I always said he should try stand-up comedy. He also smoked a lot of weed, which, as you will see, is important to this story. So, the group of us made our way into the subway tunnel without any problems. Alex and I stayed at the back because the others were too nervous to do it. It was pitch black down there, and all we had were 2 flashlights to share between everyone and a single cheap film camera. At first, I carried one of the flashlights since we were in the back, but I gave it up to one of the guys up front who was complaining about not being able to see. Not even a minute into the walk, Alex had one of his brilliant ideas. He pulled a pre-rolled joint out of his jacket, gave me this sly grin, and motioned for me to stop. "I don't have enough to share," he whispered, nodding toward the rest of the group ahead of us. Against my better judgment, I went along with it. I mean, when was I ever going to get the chance to light up in a subway tunnel again? So, the two of us stopped to smoke while we watched the rest of the group move farther away. Their laughter echoed down the tunnel and started fading into the distance. By the time we finished, we were way behind. Alex's stuff was really strong, and I started feeling more out of it than I wanted to. My tolerance was nowhere near as high as his. We picked up the pace to catch up, but then Alex noticed something up ahead. Without the flashlight, all we could see was the outline of someone standing in the middle of the tracks under the dim tunnel lights. They were just standing there, not moving and facing us. Sent a chill down my spine. Alex called out, "David!" His voice echoed through the silence of the tunnel, but the person just stood there, still as a statue. The figure on the tracks did not respond to Alex's call. Then, out of nowhere, David's voice called back to us from farther up the line. My heart sank as the realization hit. The person in front of us was not David. As if David's voice had flipped a switch, the figure suddenly started sprinting toward us. Full-on sprinting. I froze for half a second before Alex grabbed my arm, and we both bolted in the opposite direction. I was so high, I could feel panic clawing at me, threatening to take over. The scariest part was how silent the figure's steps were, like we were being chased by a shadow. This guy moved so lightly it was almost unnatural. Alex's grip on my arm tightened as we ran, his usual goofy confidence completely gone. "Faster!" he hissed, fear trembling in his voice, which only made my own anxiety worse. We still had time before the next train came, but running back the way we had come just felt wrong. Alex must have been thinking the same thing because, out of nowhere, he yanked me toward the divider and motioned for us to cross onto another track. Looking back, we probably could have just kept running to the original station. But in that moment, I was too out of it to argue, so I followed him blindly. We scrambled across the divider and started sprinting back in the direction of the abandoned station. The stakes felt even higher now. We had no idea when a train might come barreling down this track. But at least we were heading the right way. I prayed Alex's maneuver would lose whoever was chasing us, but it did not work. The person jumped the divider too and kept coming after us. The problem was, there were only a few places along the tracks where you could cross like that. If we did not find another one soon, we were stuck. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Alex started cursing under his breath, and I was so overwhelmed I felt like I might throw up. We kept running, desperately looking for another crossing point, but we could not find one. Then I felt it, the tracks vibrating beneath my feet. A faint light began to creep into the tunnel from up ahead. A train was coming. We were completely screwed. For a split second, I considered turning around and confronting whoever was behind us. But before I could act, Alex screamed, "Right here!" He darted toward the divider, and by some miracle, the next crossing point was right in front of us. We scrambled back onto the original track and sprinted as fast as we could. About 30 yards ahead, we finally caught up with the rest of the group on the platform. As I leaned over, gasping for air and throwing up, Alex frantically explained everything that had just happened. Not even half a minute later, the train roared past on the other track. Alex and the others were ready to confront whoever had been chasing us, but no one showed up. We thought the nightmare was over, until we heard another wild yell echoing from somewhere in the distance. To this day, I have no clue how that person avoided getting hit by the train. We waited until the next train passed on our track. Then we got the hell out of there as fast as we could. Looking back, Alex and I probably just ran into some homeless guy who was out of his mind on drugs. He might not have even been a real threat. But in the moment, the fear got the best of us. That is probably why we made such a reckless decision to cross the divider. Sure, the two of us could have probably handled him if it came to that. But honestly, I am just glad we did not have to find out.